yes, we can make all of our slides available. So for the recording, thank you all for coming to the first ever grants webinar by the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program for green infrastructure planning grants. So I do have someone whose hand's raised. Do you have a question or a technical challenge we're working on? I'm going to assume that was just an errant button hit. All right. So without further ado, I am going to turn this over to Alicia and Maria Jose and let them share their screen and tell you all about their work in the Woonasquatucket.
Well, hello, everybody. Do you hear me okay out there in Radio Land?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm Alicia Lehrer, and I'm the Executive Director at the Woonasquatucket River Watershed Council. And I have with me today Maria Jose Guiterrez, who is a co-facilitator of our New Voices or Nuevas Voces program. And she is also a coordinator and facilitator for our next level program called Campeones. And that's what you're going to hear about today. And this is how Olneyville community-led stormwater planning is happening with resident leaders doing the planning in our neighborhood to prevent flooding and to build green infrastructure. So just a quickie on the Woonasquatucket. Our mission is to create positive environmental, social, and economic change by revitalizing the Woonasquatucket River, its greenway, and its communities. Just as a location slide, you can see that the Woonasquatucket watershed is just a tiny little piece of Rhode Island feeding into Narragansett Bay. And even though it is so small, it is so densely populated that it actually contains about 27% of the population of Rhode Island. Most of the work that we're going to be talking about is in the Providence section of our watershed, where people are most affected by climate change issues such as urban heat island and flooding. And we have focused our community leadership and engagement programs in one community of Providence, and that is Olneyville. So this is just kind of the whole map of Olneyville, the whole map of Providence. The green is all the parts of Providence that are within the Woonasquatucket watershed, and then that yellow triangle shape with the star is the Olneyville neighborhood. Just a little bit of background on Olneyville. It is mostly populated by Hispanic population, 42%. And then there's a mix of other populations, but because it's such a high percentage of Spanish speakers, that are living in Olneyville, we actually run the programs either bilingually or exclusively in Spanish. And Maria Jose is a preferred Spanish speaker, so she is a great leader of the program. And this is so fun because it's not fun. You all are experiencing this. We have had such flooding in this neighborhood because, you know, when we get too much rain, that river, the Woonasquatucket, does overflow. So in 2010, we had kind of an epic flood, but then unfortunately, in January, we also had a pretty bad epic flood. And we're looking kind of in the same area of Olneyville here. And the picture on the right is Valley Street, and the picture on the left is the corner of Valley and Atwells Avenue. And you can see, you know, the 14 years apart, still having the same issues. And what do we need to do as a community to prepare? Well, that should be up to the people who live in the community. So just a little background on New Voices, and then I'm going to pass the microphone over to Maria Jose, and she can talk more about the programs. But basically, New Voices or Nuevas Voces is a cohort program where adult leaders get together to learn about environmental awareness. They get a historical, scientific, and environmental knowledge about the community to understand and take action for its protection and preservation. The objectives of the program are to foster that consciousness around environmental issues, gain comfort in discussing those issues, build long-term connections within the community and with people who have power in the community, and become people with power in the community, and develop leadership skills and opportunities. And now I am going to pass the mic over to Maria Jose, and she will take over.
Good afternoon to everyone, and I hope that everyone is hearing Maria Jose. Thank you. Her name is Maria Jose. Alicia presented her, and she has the honor to be part of the Nuevas Voces cohort. In a moment, she's going to present about this program that lasts around 8 monthly sessions around the space of a whole year. They want to be resilient against climate change. She's trying to switch slides right now. While we're figuring out this technical issue, if someone can help her. Meanwhile, she'll be talking about Nuevas Voces, which is a program that, as Alicia said, that is for adult leaders that are Hispanic, Latino residents that live alongside the Woonasquatucket River. The focus for these leaders is a Latin American lens. She is the representative of this Latino group that speaks Spanish and being able to connect deeply with this community. She would like to move to the next slide if someone can help.
So we're having a little bit of an issue over here that I don't know why suddenly when Maria Jose took over speaking, my screen stopped sharing. So I'm gonna just try it again and see if we can have it work. Okay.
Yes, from her computer, she's not able to change the slide, but continuing talking about Nuevas Voces. As you can see here in this photograph, Latin American people are participating in the State House, participating in one of the classes. They do activities outside of their classrooms, and where they try that the majority of the people that are affected by climate change can attend these classes, and they give compensation for their time with $25 an hour. There are translation and interpretation services when the presenters are English speakers. They are also given, and the most important service that is given is the childcare for in-person activities, so that they can be part of activities, and their children can also learn more about the environment. There's also technology and digital support. For example, like what happened during COVID when there was a lack of in-person meetings, assistance was given. In this photograph, you can see the third graduating class, which was last year in 2023, where they had 24 graduates of student learners. There was no limit, there was no age limit. And in total, up until today, there has been 56 total graduates. She is one of them, and Jenny Mercado is the co-facilitator and was also one of the graduates. Part of Nuevas Voces is to move forward with leadership and form part of the Climate Combat Champion. So the next step is within the program is called Campeones, or Climate Combat Champions. And we're learning how to develop climate mitigation understanding and preparation. Specifically preparing people that live along the river to be able to maneuver life around these phenomenons. Also, to make sure that the people that live alongside the river, they are the primarily affected, and to be able to emphasize that as well. Here we have Mark Pereira, who is the civil engineer that presents the overview of restoration and resilience projects, and who is allowing us to give us additional knowledge of the work that we're doing that sometimes maybe we don't understand right away, but with this deeper level of understanding and presentations, we can better comprehend the work that is being done so that we can better the system respective to rain, keeping the waters clean, mitigating flooding, and bettering the erosion areas. Here, this was a very cold day for us, and we were in San Souci Drive with the group of campeones, who all of them are, we want to emphasize, are graduates of Nuevas Voces. And we were looking at a completed project that is already working in this street, where we can see the effects of climate change and the problems of erosion and contamination that exist in the floodwaters. Here in these images, we can see in greater detail what I was talking about earlier. We see in the larger photograph the corner where there is the majority of erosion because the current is strongest there in the San Souci Drive. And we can see the bike lane is being affected, and also other areas of parking and the United Way offices. And we're seeing the effects of erosion, which we can see on the right-hand side pictures. We can see the river causing erosion on the rocks. And we can also see the management that has been done so we can mitigate the effects of these floodwaters. These are very well-planned projects given to, because we are seeing these strong rains that are surpassing previous limits. Here we are talking about these damages that were done. We can see the damages on the bike path on the right-hand photograph. And we can see how the asphalt has cracked. And on the left side, it is the group of campeones, of champions, that are talking about how the mitigation project has worked. And at the same time, nature has surpassed certain limits. And we have to find new solutions given the knowledge that we have and given the suggestions that are given to us by being residents of this area. In this image, we are making a visit to the Soto Street. It is the champions here and one of the residents of the area, Gloria Morales, has been a very important part of this project because given her experience and the consequences that she has already seen whilst living in this zone, she has been a great help for this project and for trying to find possible resolutions. Here this is a presentation of some proposed solutions for the Soto Street, and we can see the engineering of the filtration system and cleaning of the water so that the sediment of the water can be better captured. And there would also be a beautification element that would have some greenways. But it is a great feat of engineering to be able to resolve this climate change with the large quantity of water that is falling every year. Here we can see the ribbon cutting ceremony that was done with our campeona Gloria Morales, who developed herself as a very important leader in this group. And since she was a resident of this area, of this street, the Soto, she was a great support for the development of this project. And you can see her here. She was very proud of being able to see a collaborative project between not just the community and not just the Latin American community that surrounds the river and who lives on these streets, but also with between private institutions and public institutions, local and state. And you can see in this image, how they say image is worth 1,000 words. In this image, you can see one of the many classes that we've had where we are with the River Rangers group, who is trying to take care of the river and clean it. It is the Champions group, and we're learning about engineering, learning about how to identify the issues and problems during storms to be able to activate our group as a leadership group to go beyond the class and be able to, for example, during the storm, be able to take pictures and videos and show the effects on our streets where we live so that we are able to create that database of and be able to take that data and our experience, see ways or solutions for these effects of the storms. Here we're learning to learn and identify. Last year we had a lot of projects. This is our last visit from our December 2023 visit, where you can see in the photos a large parking lot where there's only construction and engineering, but it is not based on stormwater mitigation. But there has been initiatives to retrofit this so that it can absorb water, mitigate flooding, and be able to clean some water, because there is parking here and there's a lot of sediment that can go from here to the river, and we don't want that. So that project has been initiated, and here we are in the pictures doing our visit and evaluating our own selves based on the knowledge that we have gained. I am going to let Alicia continue now.
Thank you so much, Maria Jose. That was great. Just listening to the interpretation, I'm thinking that maybe some things weren't quite translated perfectly, but it's fine. Maria Jose did a wonderful job. I just want to explain that in one of the slides, they actually had a 4-week session on Stormwater 101 training, which was about siting and designing green infrastructure and understanding the soils, understanding what is a good place to site green infrastructure, what works well. They're really becoming experts in this field. So we're just heading into year 2 for our Campeones program. And our goals for year 2 are to continue the projects that we started in year 1. In year 1, we had a stream bank restoration on San Souci Drive that is continuing to be designed to try to find a way to prevent that erosion from worsening and stabilize that stream bank. And also the project on DeSoto Street, where we're collecting all the stormwater at the end of DeSoto Street and putting into that filtration system and creating that new rain garden area. So we want to see those projects, at least one of them, through to completion. And in addition, we are now ready for the Campeones to start prioritizing additional climate mitigation projects. And we want them to also identify other ways they would like to help their community become more resilient to flooding. So these are our leaders, and we want the leaders to speak for themselves. I'm going to pass this back to Maria Jose for a second because she's going to talk about her own experience as a Campeone.
Yes, thank you. So my experience in Campeones, I think, has been very important with the base that I've had from Nuevas Voces. So there's a point that we have in common as Latinos with Providence and Pawtucket, because the cities that we come from, we live in harmony with nature. So it's just nature for us to have that respect for nature and want to live in harmony with it, and to be able to develop ourselves in leadership and being able to protect the protect nature. And it's part of our lifestyle, it's part of how we grew up. And also Nuevas Voces and Campeones is more like our specialty from home. And like Gloria Morales was saying, I take her words. We have love for our community, love for our environment, and that motivates us very much to be able to give 100% of each of us to learn new things. And it motivates us to show our and teach our families and family members and friends to be able to have them be part of protecting the environment. Also, amongst our group of students, there are people that focus on different areas. For example, we have Miriam Morales, um, and during the summer, she has been part of our staff of WRWC, and she's worked in the area of the community canoe rides and recreation areas in the community. And it's totally open to all the public, not just Latinos. It's open to anybody who wants to learn about the Woonasquatucket River. And respect to Gloria Morales, she's a very humble person, and she has much humbleness in her leadership for her community, and she's done interviews for very important magazines that have to do with the environment. So my experience and the rest of the students is based on the reality that we live in our countries, to preserve, take care of, and preserve for the next generation a very healthy environment. So in this image, you can see Medium. She's with her daughter in a canoe on a ride through the Woonasquatucket River. So that's all I have to share for now. Of course, I have a lot more to say, but I think in summary, this is what I have to share for today. Thank you, everybody.
Great, thank you. We actually do have one question in the Q&A for Alicia and Maria Jose, and it's from Carrie, and she says, inspiring work. Does the group know yet how they will look for their next projects? And will they take walks as a group, ask neighbors? So how are you going to find your next projects? And then how, I want to add, how are you going to prioritize them? They all seem like they would be important.
I'll jump in on this one. So they definitely are already doing walks around their communities. They're starting to go out with WRWC staff in areas that we've noticed there are problems. They're also out there when it's flooding, taking pictures and saying, oh, here's where the big issues are in our neighborhood. They send those pictures to WRWC. And then as a group, we will discuss what we think are the priorities. There are 10 campeones, and we meet on a monthly basis. And our first meeting of this year is coming up next week, and we're just going to start discussing how we're going to go through the new project selection process as a group. So it's a great question.
All right, and this one is from Katie. What are the ways the Campeones communicate the projects to their neighbors and to explain what the projects will be?
So we communicate with the neighbors because they are part of our family as well. So our Latino community is very united in different ways. In churches that we frequent. So with the climate change that's going on, the storms, we communicate with the community to show them how they can get involved and see, for example, where evacuation is needed, what they need to do to help in case that they have children in their home or an elderly person in their home. And so we've learned to handle and manage applications to be able to help, to be the first ones to step up and be helped, because we live in this area that has major ecologic damage, if we can call it that way, when it comes to flooding. So basically it's mouth to mouth in the church, in the community, at the supermarket, in our homes. And we need to remember that every home, for example, every floor has a different family. So that's the way that we communicate with people that aren't inside our program, but are part of the community and in this resilient area. Another way that we communicate, or another way of communication, is with other groups. For example, Nuevas Voces. We are 10 campeones, but we still have communication based on WhatsApp group. That's the number one application that we use amongst the Latinos. So we have a big group of people that have an idea of how to get around this situation, or how to handle this situation. So we also give information through that way.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Alicia and Maria Jose, for leading us off. I'm going to turn it over to Stefanie Covino from the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. As Courtney said, I am Stefanie, and I'll be talking about our grant from the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, which was focused on capacity building, including green infrastructure. So I always like to start with some sort of land acknowledgement. And in the Blackstone watershed where we're located, these are the historic and unceded lands of the Mashpee Wampanoag, the Narragansett Indian Tribe, Nipmuc Nation, and Pokanoket Nation. And just a note that in recognition of the historic and current contributions of each of these tribes that have had centuries of careful stewardship. And for instance, the Blackstone River is called the Kittikuck by the Nipmuc people, which means Great Tidal River. This once was a tidal river and is now no longer. Similar to our previous speakers from the Woonasquatucket, it's a heavily modified river, and we'll get into that. So the collaborative was started about 2.5 years ago in response to the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program doing 2 years of outreach and asking community members, nonprofits, businesses, universities, and others, what are your priorities considering climate resilience and water quality improvements, and how can we help? And after all of that outreach with, over 100 different people from 40 different organizations and government agencies at all levels, we came up with a list of 20 different things that we can work on together to improve climate resiliency and watershed health in the face of historic challenges and also new challenges from climate change and development patterns. So we are a shared watershed. We have shared goals. Those are varied, but include enhancing our water quality monitoring program. The Blackstone actually has one of the longest water quality monitoring programs in the region. We have 20 years of data at 75 different sites throughout the watershed, both on the main stem of the river and its tributaries. We want to be able to create equitable access to waterways, meaning access in diverse locations for all communities, but also to make sure that that access is accessible. So even if you have mobility challenges, you can still get on the water. Water chestnut is an invasive species that has taken over a lot of our shallower, slower moving areas of the river and its tributaries and lakes and ponds. So we want to be able to address that. We want to improve the use of green infrastructure, including to reduce stormwater flows and reduce combined sewer overflows, which we'll get into a little bit later. improve aquatic connectivity, meaning make sure that our culverts are road and stream crossings. I'm sorry for interpretation that I didn't put that in the notes. Hopefully that makes sense. Making sure that they allow appropriate flow of water and wildlife underneath. Sometimes when those culverts, like you can see in that picture, are undersized and we have these large storm events, water can actually get in between the pipe and the roadway and cause the roadway to collapse. So it's important for public safety as well. And a big project that we're working on in Rhode Island is to be able to restore migratory fish passage. So this river has 19 dams still on it. And as I said, it used to be a tidal river, and we had these migratory fish that would come into fresh water and go back to salt water. And they've been absent from this watershed for over 200 years. And we are working to make sure that those fish can come back to their original spawning grounds. So in order to address all of these different concerns, and again, there are many more that I haven't mentioned, we've created the Blackstone Watershed Collaborative. We are hosted at Clark University in Worcester, but we work throughout the entire watershed from Worcester to Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And we're a group of over 120 organizations that all agree that ensuring a healthier and more resilient Blackstone River is critical by addressing our industrial past, ongoing urbanization, and the impacts of climate change. We offer monthly meetings. Anyone is welcome, and we host a number of events that anyone is also welcome to. And a shameless plug for May 19th is an event in Pawtucket on our migratory fish parade. It'll be a really fun event. We'd love to have you. So where is the Blackstone watershed after I've already said all of these different things? Like I said, we're a bi-state watershed in both Massachusetts and Rhode Island. It's about 48 miles long, and it's very important to note that it drops almost 450 feet over that distance. So in comparison, the Taunton watershed, our sister watershed coming into the Narragansett Bay, is a similar length, but only drops 40 feet. So we're very, very elevated, which led to our industrialization and past. It's about 475 square miles altogether, encompassing 39 different municipalities and multiple tribes. Blackstone has been called America's hardest working river because in the late 1700s, it was the site of the first industrial revolution, where we decided to use that elevation change in the river to dam the river and use that to power water to power a cotton spinning mill. And that became very popular, and we created many, many, many of these mills on the river. It's led to a lot of challenges. As I said, we still have 19 dams on the river. And there's been massive water quality challenges. It used to be a place where no fish could live back in the 1970s. And that has improved a lot, especially addressing our point source pollution. So pollution from our wastewater treatment facilities, for instance, we've done a great job of addressing. We've put a lot of investment into that, but we still have a lot of high impervious cover areas that create a lot of runoff and contribute to water quality challenges, both in the northern part of our watershed near Worcester and also the southern part of our watershed in Central Falls, Pawtucket, and Woonasquatucket going into the bay. So climate change is really important to everything that we're doing. And probably you guys know this as green infrastructure experts, but just to reiterate, when water lands in a forest, it gets soaked into the ground. When it goes into a city, we have to put it somewhere. And so we create all these impervious surfaces and put a grate on the side of the road, a catch basin. The water goes into that catch basin and is typically directed directly to the nearby water body, whether it's a pond, a lake, a stream, a river, etc. And as climate change is affecting New England, we have these increased temperatures. Also, impervious surfaces mean a lot of reflection and increased temperature, so that's exacerbated. Again, we have this extreme precipitation, and by being able to have water run off of all of these impervious surfaces and directing it to a certain place where it normally would fall a little bit everywhere, we create these really flashy systems and a lot of flooding. Also from climate change, another way that we experience that is increased drought. So this is leading to drinking water shortages, and we've already had some communities that have had private wells go dry. The city of Worcester had to tap into its emergency connection to another water source a few years ago when we had a severe drought. So these are things that we're already experiencing. It's not something in the future. We also know that these impacts are not felt equitably. So the same communities are being impacted by heat islands, areas where it's really hot, low tree cover, high asthma rates, flooding impacts, water quality impacts. And so a big part of the collaborative is being able to provide capacity building in the areas where it's needed most and provide technical assistance where it's needed most with an eye towards equity and justice. So I'm just going to list several different examples of projects that we've had that were supported by this grant. So for instance, we've supported local planning efforts. Both the city of Worcester and the city of Woonasquatucket are going through comprehensive master planning processes right now. If you're interested in either, I'm happy to send you the link. They both have drafts that are online that you can comment on. So we've shared public meetings, attended those, made sure that our priorities as a watershed, such as green infrastructure, nature-based solutions, making sure that local regulations support those nature-based solutions, are all included in the plan. We've shared information about those public meetings and been a part of that planning process that often not everyone has the opportunity to attend all of those meetings. So making sure that all the different voices that we hear are represented in these planning documents. Another project is about stormwater and combined sewer overflow. So I won't spend the time to totally explain combined sewer overflow, but it's when there's one pipe that manages both stormwater and sewer. And sometimes that overflows when we have these heavy rain events and puts sewage into our communities. And often that happens in some of our highest environmental justice communities, those who have the least ability in order to maybe know what's going on or hear about notifications, making sure that they're always provided in different languages, and what that really means for public health and how to avoid these issues, avoid that water when it's contaminated. So one project is a catch basin mural project. We work with local artists in Worcester. They put out an RFP to pay artists and do these mural projects, kind of just paying attention to what stormwater is, that knowing don't put trash down here, this actually flows somewhere, this is your watershed, this is your local stream. We've done tours of the combined sewer overflow facility in Worcester. So in this middle photo, you can see some of our operators as well as staff from the National Park Service, the Department of Public Works, and also the DPW commissioner in the city. We held other tours that were more public, and we'll be offering additional tours this year in 2024 if you're interested. We also have connected a lot of our local students with priority projects and organizations. So for instance, we had a student in the two maps on the right map the priority areas for replacing culverts and potentially removing dams. And they found this area in the center of the watershed to be most important. And so we worked with another group of students from WPI who are pictured on the left. We trained them how to assess culverts, brought them out into the watershed, connected them to different local organizations and the municipal planners and DPW staff. And we went through and assessed several culverts for them, identified some priorities, and they made a public presentation telling the community what they'd found. We then went on as the collaborative to find additional funding from a private foundation that was able to fund our time last summer, where we trained several more folks to be assessed or to be certified in assessing culverts. And we went out and assessed about 100 more culverts in the watershed. And before we had done this, we know there are about 5,000 culverts in the entire watershed, and only, I think, 30 of them were in the database. So now we're up to 130, and there's a lot more to go, but we're chipping away at it. We also want to share information about why use nature-based solutions and why we think it's important to work at this watershed scale. So we're a part of a statewide organization called MassECAN, which stands for Ecosystem Climate Adaptation Network. And we help them create a story map that identifies where different watershed scale climate collaboratives are located in Massachusetts. We're lucky that we actually have 10 of them, which is amazing. And we have done numerous presentations with other groups on how we function, how we're funded, what kind of work we're involved in, and why we think focusing on this watershed scale is important. We have helped put on a conference on this topic at Clark University, and also done a conference more nationally at Restore America's Estuaries in December of 2022 on this topic. One thing that I really wanted to call out that was, I think, really important in this Narragansett Bay Estuary Program funding, that because it provides capacity building for our own organization, that we can then provide capacity to others, it allows us to work in real time. So we didn't anticipate this topic coming up, but the Woonasquatucket wastewater treatment facility had an overflow 3 times within 1 year of the same issue of releasing solids into the river. And while this river has always had very passionate advocates, they're also very strapped for time. And so nothing was done at the first 2 instances. And at that last one, we were like, nope, this is not acceptable. And we got 20 different partners to sign on to a letter that we sent to DEM and said, we don't think this is acceptable. We really need you to address this, and you need to be more public and candid about what happened. You know, the public doesn't understand whether this issue was mechanical or whether it was a staff issue, why it's still happening after 14 days, and when it's going to be addressed, and how are we going to make sure that we can protect our public health in the future, that this isn't going to happen again. And so we worked with our partners. We got a letter back from DEM. We had Joseph Haberek from DEM speak at one of our meetings. We were able to record that and share the information out broadly and make sure it was in terms that everyone could understand, because it was a very complicated issue. And we also made sure that the governor and the attorney general knew about it. And so our partners were able to speak when the attorney general sued the city of Woonasquatucket, which sounds bad, but the city of Woonasquatucket was getting funds and then hiring 2 private contractors that were from out of state for-profit companies to run this facility. And those profits were just going back into the companies, and they weren't investing back in the facility. And so the attorney general said, no, 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 you have to invest back in this facility. You have to make sure that your staff are trained, that they know what to do when there's an issue, and that you have the appropriate emergency response in place when something does happen. And so our, you can see John Marsland from Friends of the Blackstone in this photo, talking about the blue marble and how we need to protect our blue earth and our blue waterways. So this was highlighted in several different news articles that came out, and we really tried to help change that narrative about what happened and make sure that everyone knew about it, so that these operators and other wastewater treatment facilities knew that there were eyes on this, and you know, Blackstone advocates were working together, we were organized, and we were not going to let something like this happen. So the collaborative really works at a lot of different scales. We work on the local level for on-the-ground projects and help provide technical assistance to ongoing ones. For instance, a wetland restoration project from Mass Audubon in Worcester. We work with municipalities and try and make sure we know what their priorities are, so that we can bring that up in larger priority in other larger planning documents, such as working with the regional planning agencies at the watershed scale. I also sit in the steering committee of the Narragansett Bay Estuary Program, so I get to bring up these different topics that I'm hearing about from communities and make sure that it's not just our Bostons and our Providences and our Springfields, our bigger cities that are being represented, but also these smaller communities and their goals and needs are also part of this. And if they can't attend themselves and bring a voice to those needs, we try and do that for them. So thanks so much for listening today. We really appreciate this funding support from NBEP, and I'll hand it back to Courtney.
All right, thank you, Steph. And so if we have any questions for Steph, we can throw them in the Q&A. And given the fact that we are hosting, I'm going to take a little latitude and say, so what's next? So now that you've gone through this green infrastructure planning grant, capacity building, what's your next step to keep building and planning and implementing green infrastructure in these areas?
So this has allowed us to identify a lot of different more specific needs. And because we're only 2.5 years old as an organization, it has taken us some time to get the lay of the land and understand these different partners. We're just starting to step into more implementation this year. So for instance, that culvert project that I mentioned, we have identified 2 priority culverts that need to be replaced. The community is on board with that. And so we were able to take additional funds to fund a feasibility study. And that consultant has put together an overview of what are the opportunities for replacement here? What would it look like? How much would it cost? And then they'll be submitting 2 grants to the state of Massachusetts to be able to replace that culvert. And so first they can apply for design and permitting, and then next year, hopefully we'll apply for actual implementation of replacement. Similarly, in talking to a lot of communities and reading local planning documents, we found that dam removal is really important. So we've worked with other partners. For instance, Emily Vogler from Rhode Island School of Design has created a dam atlas, which is an amazing resource. The website is thedamatlas.org, and we're in the final editing stages on that now, but helping communities prioritize which dams might be less visible from the street and have less of an attachment for people, that they wouldn't mind so much being potentially removed, but would also have a high ecological benefit if they remove them. We held a dam training last year. We got additional funds to be able to create a new working group around this. And so that's going to be starting in March, and we're doing a lot of outreach around that to create new documents and help people understand what are the steps you take when you want to remove a dam, or how do you prioritize that. So this grant, again, has just sort of allowed us to get this baseline and understand all these different topics. And then as we've identified priorities, be able to dive into each of those with additional funds.
Great, and thank you. All right, since I see no other questions, I'm going to turn this over to the Blackstone Conservancy, and we have another team presentation. 4 people are going to join us and talk about what they're doing on the Blackstone near the Blackstone Boulevard in Providence. I will ask again to mind your speed so our interpreters can keep up with what you're saying. I know it's easy to talk fast, so if we can make sure that we take a few breaths, we should be okay. All right, so with that, I'm going to let the Blackstone Conservancy share their screen.
Okay, good morning. I'm Rick Richards, and I'm with this project. It's called the South Gateway Project. It is a great example of trying to tame a flashy system. It's the recipient of a lot of water that comes down the hill and creates lots of concern for the residents and erosion concern. I'm here to begin this by telling you who is part of this enterprise. And we have a bunch of logos at the bottom. To the left is the logo of the Searle Group, and that is represented by Colgate Searle, who is a professor emeritus in landscape architecture at the Rhode Island School of Design. Then we have the Horsley Witten Group, and that involves John Ford, who is a new urbanist, civil engineer, and urban designer. Then we have the Blackstone Parks Conservancy with Carrie Drake, who is the president of that organization. They're stewards of the Blackstone Boulevard and Blackstone Park, which is really pretty central to the area of this project. Then there's the Seekonk River Alliance, and I am the organizer of that alliance. And the concern of that is the stormwater doesn't just come down into this area. It comes out of a watershed, about 450 plus acre watershed. And so that's outside the remit of Blackstone Park. So we had to create another organization to address that. And that other organization, the Seekonk River Alliance, also addresses the water sheet of the Seekonk River, its shoreline and uplands in the tri-municipal area. Then we have the City of Providence. This area, first of all, it's Parks Department. These are parks. Second of all, it's Department of Public Works. These are Department of Public Works roads. And third of all, it's planning, because if you're going to change anything, you need to develop a plan for it. So we're really indebted to someone named David Everett in the planning department, who was instrumental in our getting this grant, and someone named Tim Shea, who will be talking to us a little bit later, who's just a wonderful resource for community engagement. We are also working with Groundworks Rhode Island, the Narragansett Bay Estuary program. Thank you very much for your money. And Save the Bay. So that's who's working on this, and I'm going to like to turn it over at this point to let Colgate talk about the context of the project and more about the detail of the project itself. Colgate? Unmute, Colgate. Colgate, you got to unmute.
I'm all set now. This project started a long time ago, and it started with a concern for the Seekonk River and the edge and the public access and taking care of the edge. It started with a planning study that was done about 10 years ago through public participation, and it looked at the entire edge in Providence. And put forth a series of proposals. It got planning involved. It got a lot of people involved. The red circle on the two drawings on the other side is the study area for the Gateway project that we're presenting this time. If I could have the next slide. In all the work on the Seekonk, especially with water quality and some of the flows and things, it became clear that the watershed was the solution, right? We have to slow water in the watershed. We have to treat water, get the sediment out, get the pollutants out. So this is a map of the watershed. The dotted red line is the watershed. And thanks to the Department of Public Works in Providence, they just remapped all of their storm drainage, their sewers and their combined sewers, and where the grates are. So it's a huge resource. And we've undertaken to put that all down in one map with topography and come up with the watersheds. In other words, where the water hits the land. And it goes into drains and it goes into piping systems. So we ended up with looking at this, and all but about 50 acres of this 400+ acre thing is a standalone storm drainage. It's not combined. It's only the 50 acres that's combined. And if you look at this drawing, there's three larger blue lines. And those larger blue lines are pipes, or let's call them small rivers. They're about 30 to 40 inches, and they convey water all the way down to where B is. And then that water joins a huge brick culvert, a brick pipe that ends up going into Blackstone Park, the ravine, and the WPA channel. Into York Pond and out to the Seekonk. We have, in looking at the watershed, we have interests in A, where we get a SNEP grant, and we're actually working with Brown and Hebrew Day School on a possible storm drainage system there. We've been looking at B, and B is the site of the convergence of this water and its movement to the surface, as well as also topographically, it's the convergence of the low point in the historic system, where we get a lot of excess storm drainage or surface water. And then C is the ravine, which is under great stress now and deteriorating. The channel is deteriorating. What are the options? And we're hoping to get funding to do a preliminary study of, can it be put into a more of a floodplain stream? Should the estuary be restored and we allow the salt water to come in? Those types of questions. So we've moved from looking at the edge to looking at the watershed and combining that work. And our next slide. And so this is the Gateway project. So this is where Butler Avenue meets the boulevard. And if you see where it says Elton Street, there's a huge piece of asphalt paving. It's the place that if you head north along Butler, and you see that great big piece of paving and it's going downhill, and you speed up your car and you get a ticket. It's very, it's just an open space where we could take that paving away. So if we look at the Gateway project, we're looking at the slowing and filtering of stormwater. We're looking at improving safety, and that's safety for the bike, safety for the pedestrian, and safety for the car. And we're looking at really beginning the Boulevard Park. And it's also the potential of a connection between the two parks because they actually join here at this site. Next slide. This is a vision, and it was worked on by my office and with help from John Ford from Horsley Witten and people from Public Works. So this is the site now. This is where you accelerate and get your ticket. It's a big piece of asphalt paving. It's incredibly difficult to cross the street, and the one street crossing you get is not visible for the car. So this is the site at the beginning of the boulevard. Next slide. This is the vision where we could remove most of that paving. We can provide both swales on the right side of this picture. We can provide additional land for the capture and holding of stormwater and letting it percolate. We can also allow there to be the beginning of a much more ceremonial beginning in terms of park improvement, but also the pedestrian and the bike considered. So this is the kind of vision, and this work all was done over the last 5 or 6 years, and allowed us then to present a very clear idea in order to get funding to go actually into design. Next slide. And take it away. I'm out.
Okay, Tim.
Tim.
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm Tim Shea. So I work in the Providence Planning Department. As Rick mentioned for this project, I've been kind of a liaison between the city, the parks, public works, planning actors, and the project team. But my focus has really been on how we engage neighbors and community members in this area in this design process. And it was a really important part of our proposal and the contract that we have on this project. But, you know, the form that this took was really a collaborative one, where as our team was looking at alternatives of different designs that could potentially do all those great things that Colgate spoke to of capturing stormwater, slowing it down, improving pedestrian safety, enhancing the park itself, that we were bringing in community members in that process. So we've done a number of things. We've met really in depth with the immediate neighbors of this area, the people who will see these changes day to day. We held some meetings on site with those neighbors. We've held meetings at people's homes, and they invite their the folks around. But we also held kind of a more open public event, an open house, which you can see in the top 2 pictures on the left there at Temple Bethel, which is just around the corner. But that was an event where we laid out these alternatives and we talked through with community members in attendance about the benefits and costs of the different options. And, you know, not only this open house, we also, the Blackstone Parks Conservancy has their annual meeting where we featured the alternatives and asked for feedback. And we also created an online option on the Blackstone Parks Conservancy website where people could view the alternatives, submit their comments. We put up some yard signs in the area of the site that referred people to the information online. Yeah, and one other thing, actually, just the Elton Street neighbors who, you know, would have their kind of northbound access to Blackstone Boulevard really impacted by this, by potential changes here. We had a specific kind of pop-up coffee donut hour on the project site for neighbors on Elton Street that went really well. And Carrie, you can move on to the next one here. What we found through all of these various forms of engagement was that there was, you know, almost universal support for the alternative that really maximized kind of the park space and the depaving of this area. People really liked the idea of kind of having a little hub that is a gateway to the rest of the system that could be seen as kind of maybe a mini Lippitt Park in some forms, but that also addressed kind of the slip lane to the north onto Irving Ave, that really tried to narrow lanes of travel to slow traffic and make it safer to be crossing the street or on a bike. And yeah, I think really, of course, wherever we're expanding green space and getting rid of pavement, there's the further design will incorporate a lot of specific green infrastructure options within these areas. So we've come a long way, and I really, you know, I think a lot of the neighbors really feel a part of this, really feel like they've been driving this decision-making process. And we're pretty excited about where we are today, which is what you see in front of you. So I'm going to pass on to Carrie now.
Hi, everybody. I'm Carrie Drake. I'm the president of the Blackstone Parks Conservancy, and I am just going to run through what our next steps are now that we have this strong draft. The next step is to have 2 more meetings, one with immediate neighbors and one that really tries to engage passersby, a larger meeting on site, hopefully. And then we'll develop a 75% design draft with engineered drawings. From that, we hope to move to a shovel-ready design. This would require additional funding of maybe $30,000 or $40,000. And then eventually, we'd like to have implementation funding for this. The work is, excuse me, aligned with the city's priorities. We've had conversations with entities about it, but it's a question mark how this will happen. And we are looking for suggestions. So I guess that's about it. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy to hear them.
All right, hello all. So thank you. Please put any questions you have in the Q&A box. The one Wenley has in there now, we will get that at the end of this and share out that link to the dam atlas that Stefanie mentioned. But for the Blackstone Conservancy, I was impressed with the amount of outreach that you did in this neighborhood and the broader neighborhoods to get feedback and buy-in on this. What would be some of the lessons learned during this planning process that you would want to share with folks who are going to start working on these designs?
Let me make, I guess, just 2 observations, and then people can chime in. But first of all, it's important, and I think that's a lesson we learned in the process, that people began, the payoffs are pretty powerful. People began to endorse and even own the ideas of the project. And second of all, it takes time. It's not necessarily difficult, but there's a lot of arranging that goes into each event, and you need to be well prepared to engage with people. It really does not pay off if you're not prepared. So you cannot be haphazard in this process. Those are my two observations.
One thing that I would add to what Rick has said there is, I think I really appreciated, and I think community members appreciated that, you know, we did the kind of education about the benefits. Everyone really seems pretty on the same page, but our engagement really brought them into the design process and said, here are these alternatives that we're looking at. You know, we're curious based on your lived experience of this area, which of these alternatives do you see working? Do you not see working? So I think really we kind of defined the boundaries of what was possible and then brought people in to really be decision makers there. And I think that's pretty empowering. And I like to think that folks have really agreed with us there.
I think one thing that impressed me was the importance of something as old school as a yard sign, because the Blackstone Boulevard has a lot of foot traffic. And so one way to engage people that we didn't know was just to put a couple yard signs there, and people passing by would see, and there was a QR code where they could then go to the website and weigh in on the designs and learn about it. But I was impressed by the power of something so simple.
Yeah, I just wanted to bring up the site was selected because it's the apex of stormwater. It has all these problems, all this asphalt, but it's so visible, not only to the neighborhood who drives through there, but many people who work at Butler Hospital or go to the Pawtucket this way. So it's a regional visible park. And so part of this always has been public education. So we really view this as a demonstration project of what you can do. And so many people will see it. So the public participation is about education. And that's why we spent a lot of time on it, to bring people in to hear differences, because it's only when we get enough of the public interested in this that we're finally going to get administrative changes so that we can begin to start to have this happen more regularly within watersheds or within streets and communities. So yeah, careful listening, but part of it is education, right? Of us as well as it is the public.
That's great, thank you. Wenley from Save the Bay has commented that they participated in the SNEP network training series to identify and develop conceptual designs in the upper York Pond watershed. So it's exciting to see this happening in this area. Two sides of the watershed getting priority. George Christie has a great question, and he asks, where do regionally native plants fit in with this within this design?
Well, they're important, and we don't have a detailed plan for what will happen to the actual land that is created by this project, but certainly native plantings would be a very high priority. Colgate, do you have, or Carrie, do you have any information on the, the overall planting plans?
We haven't got there yet. Most of this work is really trying to decide how little parking and how much space that's going to be ground that could be planted. But the Conservancy over the last 15 years has supported a native plants garden, which is right in the center of the existing end. And we hope to be able to formalize that a little bit more. So there are people who spend their volunteer time taking care of it. So there's an educational piece that's slowly been building over the last 15 years. We hope to be able to extend that a bit, but also formalize it. So we are working in a way there. In terms of this, I imagine with some of the storm drainage systems or the rain garden systems, those will be heavily dependent. And some of the species work will be, speaking of things that will grow well in wetter conditions, but also trying to have enough species variety given our climate change. So I guess it's a very interesting thing, but we need to have all these spaces of ground, not only to collect water, but we need it to plant trees in the city. So I think that's where we're headed. Again, the actual design of these things, I think, comes in the next 6 to 8 weeks when we finally finish the participation piece and actually go into how are we going to deal with the storm drainage? How do we deal with the surface? So that's our next step.
And we've had a commitment. One piece of our mission on the Blackstone Parks Conservancy is planting resilient species. So we're looking at things that used to be more southerly that are now more resilient here than some of the older species, and especially as some of the trees planted in 1904 when the boulevard was originally landscaped are aging out. They're being replaced with plants, trees that will be resilient, and we do try to showcase the beauty of native plants for all the passersby, as that's part of our mission too.
That's wonderful. Thank you. All right. So for our final speaker, I'm going to turn over to Ryan Kopp, who is from the Audubon Society of Rhode Island and the Stormwater Innovation Center, to show us how you can actually monitor green infrastructure and why we should monitor green infrastructure. All right. So take it away, Ryan.
Okay, yeah, thank you very much for the opportunity to let us share some of the work that we've been doing over the past couple of years and plan to continue to do in the future. So our project was to monitor existing green infrastructure sites in the Providence metro area to try to get a better understanding of how these sites are performing during rain events and stormwater events, and then to share these lessons learned with the hopes that current and future projects can improve their design, construction, and maintenance, so that these sites are working the way they're intended to work by filtering polluted stormwater rather than having it be discharged into our water bodies. So this project was a collaboration through the Stormwater Innovation Center, working with Audubon Society of Rhode Island, the Nature Conservancy of Rhode Island, and the University of New Hampshire.
Ryan, can you please share your screen?
Oh, you can't see it?
No.
Oh boy, that's such a great first slide here.
Oh, well, you can show us the slide. You had a great introduction. I didn't want to interrupt.
Yeah. Here we go. Can you see that now?
Yes, and please
Okay.
remember to speak as slower for our interpreters so they don't get lost.
Okay. Yeah, so we did all this monitoring in the Providence metro area. These are the 26 existing green infrastructure sites that we collected or selected, and we only had enough equipment to monitor 3 sites at a time. So this monitoring was done, I think, in 2022, through the summer of 2022. But we only had enough equipment to monitor 3 sites at a time. So we would monitor these sites until we received 3 qualifying rain events. And we set that metric of being 3/4 of an inch of rain. That's when we thought we had enough information to assess whether or not these sites were working properly. Once we got those 3 qualifying rain events, we then rotated the equipment to 3 more sites. So it was fairly time consuming. This is an example of a typical stormwater site that we monitored. This is a picture during a dry weather condition, and you can't get a lot of information about whether or not a site is working properly when it's dry. There are some indicators that you can get, but really we want to know what's happening during wet weather conditions. So we installed some sensors within the pre-treatment area and the treatment area at the low point of these basins. These sensors measure water level or water depth. And so that way we can get a sense of what's going on when there is water at the site without having to be there. So how we did that, we set up these above ground stilling wells. It's basically, they're inexpensive. It's a piece of PVC pipe, hose clamped to a piece of rebar, drilled some holes in it so that when water does fill up, it goes inside that PVC pipe. And then we drop these sensors in here that measure the water level. And then you can program this instrumentation to log water depth every 5 minutes, or you can choose whatever you want. We chose 5 minutes. Another method that we experimented with was using a similar stilling well. This is called a crest stage gauge, but instead of dropping a piece of specialized equipment inside of this PVC pipe was just a wooden stick that we attached a mesh basket to at the bottom. And then on the right, this is granulated cork. We filled that mesh basket with that granulated cork so that when water entered into that stilling well, it rose up, and then once that water level receded, it leaves a nice debris line on that stick with that cork. And so essentially then you have a water depth, and this setup only costs a few dollars, and so you don't have to buy this specialized equipment. We used it as a way to verify that the instrumentation was recording a similar depth, but you could use it standalone as well, and then you are able to get a maximum instantaneous depth of any rainstorm that you have installed this crest stage gauge in. We then surveyed each site, did an elevation survey, and that was just to reference the elevation of the sensor location with other design features, particularly the overflow bypass elevation, the weir elevation, or the top of a berm, just so that all those elevations are correlated and referenced together. We also measured rainfall. In order to understand how much water should be in a site, you want to get a sense of how much water is coming down from the sky. So we set up our own rain gauge, and then we also gathered existing rainfall data from NOAA, the National Weather Service, COCO-RAS, and then when we were comparing that versus site water levels, we tried to use the rain data that was closest to that site that we were comparing the rainfall with. So this is just sort of a cross-section to visualize what we're trying to understand. And so here's the elevation, or the location and elevation of the sensor. When water comes in, because of what we were recording, we had a water level. And then because of our elevation surveys, we also had the elevation of an overflow or a berm, basically trying to understand what the overall storage capacity is of this site. And during a given rain event, if we're not getting close to that designed storage capacity, that was an indicator that there probably could be a problem with the site. This is sort of the output file of all of the data that we collected. It seems kind of crazy, but it's not actually that crazy. This upper box is precipitation. So these bar charts right here are daily precipitation from these given sites over here in the key. And then the scale over here is rainfall just in inches in depth. And then the red line is rainfall intensity, so a depth per unit of time. So that scale is over here, and that's just in inches per hour. And the bottom chart is the depth or water level data. And so when the blue line down here, when it's flatlined, that's when the site is dry. And so during these rain events, you can see the water level goes up, which it should. And then these horizontal lines are different design features. So this is the overflow bypass, and this was the elevation of the sidewalk. So if a site's working correctly during these rain events, the water level should rise, hit the emergency overflow or bypass, and then stop that rising so that it doesn't get up to this elevation. If water is getting up to this elevation on the sidewalk, then that's an indicator that your bypass isn't working and there's probably flooding that's going on. Not everybody likes those fancy graphs, so we also tried to have a method that was a little less quantitative and more visual. So we bought all these different time-lapse cameras and installed them at the sites. And this gave us information not just on if a site was working or not, but how or why it was or wasn't working. So here's an example of one of those time-lapse footage. This is at Sabin Point. And water comes in, gushes right in, and not much was missing the inlet. And so that was a good indicator that that site was working. Another method that we used, very simple, it was just to get out as frequently as possible during rain events, take out your camera and record video of these sites. The downside of this is that it is pretty time consuming to get to all these sites, and also somewhat difficult to get to the site exactly at the time that the stormwater runoff is happening. So having these other methods of mounted time-lapse camera and recording water depth also was very helpful, but this is a nice supplement. So what do we find? We found that there were some challenges with the design, with certain designs, certain construction processes, certain maintenance practices, but usually it was sort of a combination of all three of these, or a combination of two out of the three. And so, yeah, I'll just kind of go through some of the examples that we found. One common issue is sizing or capacity. This is an infiltration basin here that's running parallel to the curb line over here. This was, I think, only about a 1-inch rain event. And as you can see, this is definitely working in the sense that it is filled up, it's treating stormwater, but it may not be sized correctly, because even in a 1-inch rain event, it's already, overflowing out into the street. This site doesn't have an overflow within the site, so any excess overflow, unfortunately, floods the road. Another common issue is debris blocking the inlet that deters stormwater flows from entering the site. And sometimes this is just a maintenance issue, that there was a lack of maintenance, so it wasn't being done. Other times it's maybe a combination of a design that makes it not real practical or easy to access that debris or whatever to do the maintenance. So that's I guess an example of it can be just maintenance, but it could make it a lot easier for the maintenance staff if the design was improved. Here's another example where it's not just sediment. Sometimes it's vegetation, and you can see right here, this is a curb cut inlet. The water is supposed to be entering in here. You see, this is very dry, where the other side, this has two inlets. This side is taking water, but this even an inch of vegetation can deflect some of that water away from where it's supposed to be going into the inlet and ends up bypassing the site. This is an example of a forebay that the forebay in the pretreatment area is designed to deposit sediment, but if you don't remove that sediment from the forebay, it does end up eventually changing the grade of the unit itself. And so you can see the water here wants to go this way, but there's a big mound of sediment and debris that is right here. So water can no longer flow that way because the grade has been changed. Then this is the same site, and it sort of has backed its way up into the throat of the inlet. So there's now also sediment back in here. And so water is supposed to be going down and going into this inlet, but instead it's all bypassing and going downstream to a catch basin that isn't going into a green infrastructure site. It's being piped directly into the closest water body. This is that same site again, where an attempt was made to take all that rock out and regrade it. This took about 4 hours with 15 people, so it's not something that is sustainable long-term for, I think, any maintenance staff. And we got it working again, but then within 2 or 3 storms, the same thing had happened, and the sediment was deposited in the pretreatment area, and so the site was no longer working again. Another issue with sediment in your site is not just in the pre-treatment area, but in the treatment area. If you get enough sediment deposited in the treatment area, you're just decreasing the amount of the volume of water that can be treated. So here you can see the overflow down at the bottom. Really, this site has enough storage capacity that you could raise up this overflow, and then you would have more capacity to treat stormwater. But I think that's a common issue that's going to continue to occur as these sites age and continue to get sediment deposited over and over and over again. This is an example of a site that, because sediment has been deposited, it is decreasing the volume that can be treated, but it also is infiltrating and draining real slowly. You can see right here, during these big rain events, the water level comes up. That's good. Water's getting into the site, but it should be coming down again and draining real quickly. But instead, this is, taking almost up to a week, sometimes 4 days, when it should be draining within 24 to 48 hours. This brings on the issue and complications with mosquitoes and things like that. This is an example of, we saw it a lot in parking lots as well, but this is, we didn't actually monitor this site, but it's such a good example that it's worth sharing. But the grading of the roadway itself, so water's coming down towards us in this picture, and it's supposed to be going into this inlet right here, but because of the grading of the asphalt in the road, water ends up bypassing the inlet. And again, while some water is making it in, but a lot of it is just going over to the other side of the road where it's going down this catch basin, which gets piped right to the nearest water body. So all that water that's going down is raw stormwater and goes in untreated. The slope of the inlet is also something that we saw frequently. Here, water is coming towards us up in the upper right, and the inlet is here, and it's supposed to be going down, off to its left if you're traveling like the stormwater, but it's just heading right towards us because there's no change in gradient or slope to have gravity coax and push that stormwater into the site. It's pretty common that we see it with these curb cut inlets. Here, the same thing's happening with a trench drain inlet. The water's coming towards us. It's supposed to be going in here, but it's because there's no change in slope within the asphalt to push it into the inlet, it just ends up bypassing the site. This is a rain garden that has multiple inlets. On this other side over here, the site's working really well. Water is getting diverted from a large parking lot off to your left. Water's entering the site, but over here, this part of the parking lot is draining right here, and it's jumping over the sidewalk into the curb and down into this storm drain down here. That's not where it's supposed to be going. I spoke with the designer, and he said this site was designed to have, instead of a transition curb, it was supposed to be a full curb here that would divert water into this site, into kind of the backside of this site. But because this curb got constructed incorrectly, the site isn't working fully the way it should be. And I think that's the case in many situations, that it is functioning, but maybe not 100% the way everybody wanted it to work. Sometimes the issues, we don't really know what's going on. This was a site where there's a catch basin out on the road, and water is being piped from the road into this large infiltration basin in a DOT on-ramp. And even during this rain event, where there was 6 inches of rain, 8 inches of rain, you probably remember that rainfall in 2022 is just massive. Our water level sensors were not picking up any ponded water whatsoever in this basin. So we looked at the footage of the time-lapse cameras, And obviously there is a bunch of water pumping out of the inlet. And this is where the water is supposed to be ponding, but it's not. It's immediately going subsurface into this riprap area. Here's just another view. We came out a couple of days after, and there was still water coming out of this inlet, but it was immediately going subsurface instead of collecting and ponding in the infiltration basin area. So we followed it, and about 200 yards down gradient, all of a sudden we saw water upwelling out of the ground, and then it continued flowing downstream about another 100 feet or so, and then all of a sudden it disappeared into this giant hole in the soil, and we couldn't find where it went after that. So we don't know if this is creating this huge sinkhole in the middle of a on-ramp or not. Overflow elevations are another common issue. This site, these black things aren't tires. I think it's a riser to control the elevation of the overflow. Right now, the elevation is quite a bit lower because these risers were either vandalized or broken in a storm or something and not put back on. So this site is, it is working, it's filling up, but then it's not filling up to the design storage capacity. It's filling up just a little bit and then going down that overflow. We've seen the opposite of that happen too, where the overflow elevation is actually higher than the elevation of, say, a burn like this. And so water is then escaping out the side of the site rather than going down that emergency bypass. And, it can cause all sorts of flooding if it was this site, it would cause flooding in this ball field or something rather than acting like an emergency bypass. That's sort of many of the examples that I have. I guess the take-home message would be to continue to monitor and inspect green infrastructure after implementation. Sometimes immediately after a site is installed, there are problems with it. Sometimes 5 years later, there's going to be an issue with it. They have a life expectancy, whatever that life expectancy is, and you're going to have to probably continue to make repairs on the site to keep it functioning. So I can take any questions if anyone has any.
All right, folks, if you have any questions, please put them in the Q&A box. But actually we do. We were, the one gauge you showed where the water was draining very slowly.
Yeah.
Wouldn't you want it to drain slowly in the system, or is it draining slowly at the wrong time?
I think you want it to drain within 24 to 48 hours. Otherwise, it poses a risk to like mosquito larvae. And you do, I think you will get better treatment the slower the drain, but I think you run into some of those other risks as well. And if there's another storm behind it and it's full, then that next storm doesn't get treated because there's no storage capacity in that site because it's still full of water.
Okay. And then one other thing. So you've monitored a lot of these. Mm-hmm. What then is the next step? So you've monitored, you found that you've had some issues. Mm-hmm. What do you do then?
Yeah, so some examples in Roger Williams Park where we started this monitoring quite a few years ago. We've identified, a handful of these sites that aren't functioning. So we have taken some of this data and information and applied for funding. Against Bay Estuary program is funding one of the repairs and retrofits of these sites. We've also, with this data, taken it to the owners and operators of the sites we monitored. Let them know about some of the issues if they have any issues, and then they have access to this data as well, and so that they could go and apply for future funding to make the necessary repairs to keep them working.
All right.
Oh,
well,
actually, I was going to put into the chat, we've compiled all of this into an interactive website that shows every single video, every single data point, design plans, photos, all of our methods, so you can cruise around and look at it a little bit slower.
All right, thank you. And Eliza has a great question. So she understands that you were showing problem cases, but it paints a negative picture of how well these projects function. Can you speak generally to how many projects were identified to have problems versus ones that worked as designed and intended?
Yeah, I would say over the course of 4 years of monitoring about 60 sites, an average would be 15 to 20% have some sort of issue, whether it's, it's a very small amount that like don't function at all, but that does happen, and those are out there. But the other ones have partial function, that they're not performing up to the standards that they probably were intended to function at. But yeah, I mean, I think sharing lessons learned, it's important to show things that aren't working, and it sends a message that we're all working on this together, and that we need to make these repairs and improve and learn and evolve with design, construction, and maintenance. And yeah, I get that it's a negative picture, but it's a negative picture that I think needs to be told. Just like a stormwater CSO overflow, you don't brush that under the table. You talk about it.
Great, thank you. We're at 1:25. If anyone has any last minute questions, we can entertain them. Oh, I ask and receive. Carrie asks, are you designing new green infrastructure features to a different standard? So are the standards changing?
Yeah, definitely. I think with inlets, the slope of the inlets are getting a lot steeper. People are recognizing that water doesn't want to take a right or a left-hand turn and go against gravity. I don't think that was always understood or the case. I think the concept of having a forebay or a treatment area that isn't easily cleaned and maintained and the sediment and debris scooped out, that's something that is evolving. Before it was more based on aesthetics and making it look pretty, but it wasn't really functioning the same way. So yeah, I think there are improvements being made.
Okay. So I want to thank everyone for today. This has been a great lunch webinar. Thank you to our four sets of speakers, I should say. We had many more than 4 speakers, for sharing capacity building, planning, and how you monitor these, so that maybe we can all take a little bit more away when we go to plan our own green infrastructure. And a heartfelt, amazing thank you to Alicia and Patty, who were our interpreters for today. They are from Be More Interpreting, which is a local group, and Alicia Lehrer pointed us in their direction, and they've been fantastic. So thank you, thank you. We will make the recording available. If you can share with me your final presentation, if you would like it also, I can link it onto our website as well, so everyone can kind of follow along. And yes, that's it. So we will definitely be doing this again. So we hope to see many of you in the future. And thank you very much. All right.